Hello, everyone, and welcome to tonight's Century Guild Salon. I'm Kat Handler, and tonight we're going to be talking about Berlin Girls. Let you have a good look at it. So this is the standard edition that we published, and this is the deluxe numbered slipcase. It slides out like so, and then it's fabric wrapped. So I'm very excited for this evening. We're going to be talking about artworks from the Weimar Republic, 1923. I could start explaining it, but before I do that, I'm going to introduce the author, Thomas Negovan. Hello.
Hello. I am trying to figure out our image share here.
Perfect. Well, I mean, this is such a special blink of an eye in history. It's just a period of intense innovation and cultural expression, and I'm just going to keep talking until we get our image share going on. But yeah, I mean, I know that this is a subject that's very near and dear to your heart, Tom, and that you have developed quite a bit of expertise in. And so I'm just going to pull up our imaging right there.
Yeah, I'm trying to make it do multiple. And I may have to share each one separately. I may just have done this poorly.
It'll be great.
Yeah,
go with it. Okay.
Oh, here we go.
Well, I mean, we could do them one at a time. That's fine.
Yeah, that's just what we'll have to do.
Okay. So let's talk about this artwork, this collection of beautiful images. There's a lot of confidence. There's a lot of lightness and whimsicality to it. And this is following the intense destruction of World War I. So basically what I wanted to ask you is, how did this come to be of public interest? How did people come to really be interested in these works of art?
How did people, I don't understand the question.
How did these artworks come into the public consciousness? How did they become something that were shared?
So what basically happened is, and I apologize because I didn't hear some of your lead in because I was focusing on this. You did mention that it was just after the war. So a little bit of the back history is that during the years of the First World War, obviously life was difficult. And then after the end of the war, Germany didn't do well in the war, especially financially. So aside from any military or political issues, war reparations that they were ordered to pay wound up really decimating the economy. And so what happened in Berlin in the years after the war, in what is called the Weimar Era, because of a treaty that was signed in Weimar, Germany, is that you had, because the war was ended, they lifted the ban on censorship. And so you had this explosion of creativity. And you do see things like German Expressionism come to life, and people were dealing in the fine art worlds in ways, dealing with the crisis in ways that are still influential today. And kind of like in the same way that you have maybe someone like a Kate Bush or a Laurie Anderson, or someone that's, Laurie Anderson's a good example, like songs like Oh Superman that are very computer based, or the way we watched that Sparks documentary, where it winds up being influential, but maybe a lot of the public isn't aware of it. So what we covered in this book is more what the public was aware of. And so the point that I'm getting to is you had all of the chaos of the First World War. You had all of this incredible avant-garde art happening. And then in the middle, you had this convergence of two things. You had incredibly talented artists that worked in the realm of film or illustration or fashion. And then you had a public that needed entertainment. And so the periodicals were, excuse me, the periodicals, had titles like Laughter and Bachelor Life and things like that. And
Right.
what these, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry, I said right.
And so what the periodicals did was that they would have fiction narratives, they'd have poetry, they'd have lots of joke type illustrations, kind of the way like Playboy had their gag panels and stuff like that. And in those, some of the really magnificent illustrators of Germany of the day were creating things that were a lighter side of what, excuse me, what we may think of when we think of Berlin. We think of the movie Cabaret, we think of the raunchy nightlife, we think of those things, but to a normal person, they liked thinking about showgirls, but it wasn't as dark as a lot of things, when we think of Berlin lifestyle. So like here, I'm going to actually close this window. This is one of the periodicals. Actually, here's two. They're little. But so, well, actually here, I'm going to put this one up. So this one, this image isn't in the book, but this is Joseph, camera backwards. This is Joseph Fenniker. And he created a lot of the posters for the German expressionist movie posters. They're super dusty. And for this, it was lighter illustrative fare. So you do get really outstanding artists that are actually here. This is a perfect time for me to pull up one of the images from the book. Just as an example. Can you see that one?
Yes, there we go.
So Seher, or Seher, I'm not sure how you pronounce it. You can see in her headdress, it definitely couldn't have been done in 1910. It's a very Art Deco in the way that we think of Art Deco here in America kind of feel. But her headdress and the fact that she's a woman with those incredible heels and she's got her stockings on and she's getting ready. And then the man is peeking in and she's powdering his nose, kind of like, whether she's saying, leave me alone, or I'm not ready yet, I don't know. But they're meant to be flirty and they're whimsical and they're very empowering the women as the women are the main characters in this story, which is something that I like about these images, is that when you look at, I'll pull up another one here. Let's see what's
well, they're the main characters in a very powerful way too.
Yeah.
It's not a passive image by any means.
Can you see this one? I think this is a really fun example.
We're still on the powdering image, the Seher.
What this does. Did it share it? No. I'm so sorry about this. Oh, I got to do it this way. Sorry. There we go. So you tell me what she's thinking.
Another one?
Yeah. But you know what I mean? Like, it's not, I just like that it's a, yeah, I like that it's a flirty perspective, but look at, she's wrapped up in her thing, and her eyes are fantastic and the illustration is great, and it's sexy without being objectifying.
Definitely. And so it's very playful, it's very funny at times, and it's sexy. So is this is this more of a distraction for the culture, or is this more of like a hopeful?
I mean, is the glass half full or half empty today? I mean, I would say both. I mean, if you, at this time, getting a loaf of bread was problematic, but the war was over, So I think that people were on the cusp of, I think that times were incredibly hard, but I think that they had survived something horrific, and the future was whatever it was going to be. You know what I mean? Like, meaning it was, the days were blossoming in a sense of, you were healthy, you were alive. And so I do believe that it was towing the line between the escapism and optimism, but I think that that's necessary. I think that expressionism, and for those who aren't familiar, expressionist art, what basically happened is all of these young artists who were really classically trained went out to the war and saw explosions and were shot at for years. And then when they came back, their art was just brutal in its line. And it felt like fear. It felt like the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, the way the city leans in, it feels claustrophobic. And it was the idea that lines can make the feeling of a thing truer than the representation of the thing itself. But like sometimes people want to not live in an unpleasant past or in the unpleasant parts of the psyche. It's a good thing to examine, but these artworks, I'll pull another random one up, this is a great one. This was the reality for the wealthy, but I suppose that it's, let me do this again. People always look at what the wealthiest people are doing. Look at how we utilize YouTube celebrities. So this image is a great example. Like, look at this incredible showgirl. Do you have it there?
Yeah. Yeah.
Plank towel. So look at the makeup girl is fantastic. The showgirl, and it's great art. It's really fantastic illustration. And then you've got the painter with his furrowed brow. And you see a little bit of the German expressionism in their Cupid lip shapes and in the painter's, intense Conrad Veidt looking stare. But it's optimistic and it's fun, and it suggests the idea of a much better time, a pleasant time.
Well, definitely. And I know that this era has a reputation for decadence in many ways. And we see that a lot in the art, but it was also incredibly innovative on multiple fronts. I mean, social policy, architecture, art, film. You're talking about expressionism, like that was the dawning of silent film. And, even artists like Fenneker, who were illustrating for, doing illustrations like these that are seen in Berlin Girls, he was doing expressionist film posters. And so it was a very explosive time.
Well, everything was broken, like you had, what do you rebuild from the wreckage? And, there's kind of a double-edged sword there, because for a good, 8 years, it was probably, I would say, the most innovative period in the 20th century is in that pocket right after the wars, like 1918 to 1926. And, and then of course, after that, some bad things also had taken root in that wreckage. But, like when you mention it being the dawning of silent film, of course, silent film goes back to the 20th century, but I know what you mean, which is the elements in silent film that when we think of classic silent film and we're thinking of things that really influenced modern cinema, that the way things were lit, the way the sets really came into play in a as being a character unto itself with personality instead of a realist thing, that did all come from that German era. It started a little earlier, but yeah.
You know, you're absolutely right that, you know, you could look at the Praxinoscope at the turn of the century, before the turn of the century. But yes, the classical silent film as we see it most of the time. Well, you know, when you think about it, there was a brand new constitution in 1919, which created this very liberal atmosphere.
I'm just thinking about all the comments you're going to have now of people talking about silent films in 1910 versus 1923, and you just opened yourself up for that, but go ahead.
Nobody better say anything about crude illustrations.
Oh no.
So yeah, I mean, and you know, there was an author, you know,
not to cut you off again, but the joke that she just made that has no context is we were looking at the film, how do you pronounce it? Pierrot?
I don't speak French.
It's the first animated film, like the first animated film in history. And on Letterboxd, someone put the comment about these illustrations are really crude. And we were just laughing like that. The person didn't understand this was the first animated film ever. And they were just making that kind of a critique.
I've taken on the duty of bringing the positive side of Weimar into this conversation, but I'm just going to step back for a moment and say that tore my soul apart when I read that.
So 1919.
Yes. Well, I mean, sorry, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I was asking about what were you going to say about 1919?
So there's this new constitution that has been created at this point, and Christopher Isherwood, this legendary author who was writing in Berlin at the time and who Cabaret was later based on, you know, his writings.
He wrote a book called I Am a Camera about his time in Berlin as a journalist. And that is what I Am a Camera was the name of the stage play that then became a film. And then they later adapted that into Cabaret. So there was a 1953 film with Lawrence Harvey, and I can't remember the woman's name. I'm drawing a blank. I can picture her. Something with a J. But yeah, so if you're a huge Cabaret fan, there is another film of the same story that has a beautiful Kurt Weill song in there that I've never heard anywhere else, called In a Cafe in Berlin.
Another amazing artist of that period, Kurt Weill. So he was basically talking about this new liberal atmosphere in Germany at the time, and the Constitution basically, and I'm getting to something here, but it basically guaranteed every German the right to, quote, express his opinion freely in word, writing, print, picture, or in any other manner. So, I mean, it's crazy when you think about how extreme this time was, because you had the very liberal thinking here, but then you had crazy things happening like dance being outlawed. So it just seemed very inconsistent at the time.
Well, what time was he specifically referring to?
This was in 1919, the new Constitution.
The Constitution outlawed dance?
No, the Constitution was very liberal at this time. The confusion I have is, why were there such shifts in legislation? You had like very left and right extremes happening at this time. So you had
the country was decimated, you know? I mean, like, look at what's happening right now. You know, like when people get polarized and it pulls far apart, you had the very, very you know, this is the cliche of when people talk about like things now being like then, it's because you had where the liberal artist community was going really hard one direction. And then what we would call maybe the either working class or money were kind of banding together and pulling to another direction. And the working class was getting completely usurped by the financial structures at that time. And then the creative community was taking it completely over the cliff. Like you had Anita Berber shooting heroin up on stage. Like it was as insane as it. Anybody who thinks they're edgy, like when we talk about an Alice Cooper or like Ozzy Osbourne or any of the legendary stuff, like Anita Berber was really doing it. It was very, what's the word? All of the liberation surrounding censorship, the arts community took massive advantage of that. And so when you're talking about why were there such polarizing elements, is that you had standing over this wreckage, you know, everyone was kind of fighting for the scraps. And that's why, like, the Deutschmarks plummeted from, you know, it was like maybe, you know, 200 Deutschmarks to get a loaf of bread or, you know, to buy a meal. And then that plummeted to like 200 million.
I mean, it's crazy. I actually looked it up. By late 1923, so the year that these artworks from this book were made, the dollar was worth over 4 billion marks.
Yeah, that's, you know, so what basically happened is then you had an economy that sprung up. It was a black market economy. You also had then a labor-based economy. And, you know, it was a hard time. I think the most important thing to remember is people survived, and it didn't devolve into like a Mad Max type scenario, but politically maybe it did, but on a human level, and this is kind of where this book fits, I think, is it's almost like when you look at Twitter now, or you look at, you know, crazy, weird political stuff, and you realize like that doesn't affect your lunch. And it doesn't necessarily affect what you're doing with your family that day. And that there was a huge, huge audience in Germany of people that were very, very in the middle on all of this and had very sophisticated and complicated opinions, but weren't battling it out the way that some of the political factions were. And I think that, like, I noticed that someone commented and said something about their like German versions of the Gibson Girls. That's a perfect, perfect example that I think when a lot of people on an academic level are looking at that time in Germany, what they're exploring is German expressionism because it changed the world. There's no question. But you can't then ignore the populist artwork, which was extraordinarily well done and really beautiful. And if you didn't have the shadow of expressionism looming over it, pun intended, this is work that you would celebrate in that lineage of Gibson to Vargas, but in the European sense. And also, this is something for people in here that are comic people. The people who know these artists are the European comic artists, because the way that we know the Gibson Girl or Vargas, if you grow up in Europe, you in a thrift store in your grandparents' attic, these are the magazines that you saw. And so you're aware of this as part of a lineage of illustration. And I think that's why, I mean, I love American comic illustration, but I do feel that the Europeans tend to be a little more innovative when you get someone like a Mobius, or, I mean, you could go on and on and on. You know, there's a different sensibility to it. And it's because they were informed by different things in their childhood, you know, different. What do we see when we go into a thrift store? You know, what do we see when we go into an antique store, and think of the way that informs what we think of as line and color and shape.
Right.
So I'm kind of going off on an art tangent. I guess it's in our book, but I'm going off on the comic tangent. The important thing here is just that I think that all of these artists are incredibly fantastic. And, you know, I'm going to pull up, what's another good one? I'll pull this one up just because this is, speaking of the Gibson girl kind of thing, this illustration, hold on one second. Let me pull this up. You sing a song really quick to buy me a minute. Okay, here it is. But look at that. Like, you know, if this was American illustration, like you've got the guy in the top hat and he's with his date at the opera, and there's other women in the background and they've got their luxurious coats, and look at her cropped hair.
Yeah.
You know, like that's a great hairstyle, and so much. That's a 1923 haircut.
Oh, absolutely.
So liberated. She's a redhead, which, as you know, represents someone who's modern and on the cutting edge. But look at her great jewelry, and look at, you know, he's just got that, you know, his serious Olaf von Homunculus face. He's a serious German guy.
I like that. We're throwing it back to the last salon guy. So there are artists like Jean Mammon or George Gross or Otto Dix who are very known from this era. You know, their styles are very recognizable. Their works are very recognizable, I should say.
Yes.
But many of the artists published in these periodicals are often uncredited. And I mean, I just, you know, it's sad, obviously, but you know,
I was able to track down who a lot of them were. I think that the reason why everyone knows Otto Dix. I think the reason why people know Jean Mammon, Otto Dix, is that they were doing a lot of work that represented social consciousness. You do get a lot of, like, you know, Jean Mammon's work can get pretty dark. It's very nightclub at 2 a.m. kind of thing. And I think another thing with this book is I didn't want to buy into the idea that you had to be edgy to get recognition. I mean, the reality of history is that that has proven to be the case. But so for me, it was, well, why not show this work? These are all artists that none of them have had monographs done on their work, you know? And you look at how great the illustration work is. And another thing that's a big part of what I'm hoping comes of this is I know we have a lot of artists that buy our books. And so I'm also hoping that whether it's a young artist getting exposed to more things or a more mature artist that's just looking for different inspiration, is that these are things that aren't reprinted anywhere. You don't see on the internet. And if you're an older artist, it gives you more fuel, you know, exciting things that you haven't seen before that are extraordinary in quality. Like, look at how great and tight their faces are, and then what happens is the background falls off. Like, there's all kinds of things in this that, you know, are master classes in illustration. And then if you're a younger artist and you come across this book, well, now you've got an ingredient in your soup that no one else has. You know, because it would be like taking a trip to Europe and wandering through a flea market and coming back with a bunch of old magazines that are different than what everyone is doing. And I dislike the idea of things becoming derivative and then derivative again and derivative and derivative. And so I do hope that this book, which, you know, cover up again, if you are an art person, that there's stuff in here that will fuel your imagination, because it's not going to be things that you've seen before. So that to me is, I mean, I love Jean Mammon, I love Otto Dix, and this is just different. This really is the It's more in the Leyendecker universe or the Gibson universe. It's in the universe of people that were doing really great artistic, creative work and speaking kind of to the wider country.
Right. Yeah, that's a great way of putting it. Hello, Count Orlock 22.
Oh God, that guy.
We have a question from
Hi, Sean.
Did Mel Gordon's work inform your interest in Weimar era culture?
Sean, do you not know the answer to this? We are all Mel Gordon fans here.
Yes, we are.
Yeah. So what Sean is talking about is Mel Gordon. One book in particular for this era is called Voluptuous Panic, and Mel Gordon passed away a few years ago, but he wrote a book that really encapsulated what it was like to be in Berlin in this era, and the amount of detail that he went into in terms of the names of the nightclubs and which crowds frequented which and all of these things was definitely my fuel. Sean, you will love this. So I had a couple interactions with Mel that are notable that I'll share. One is that years and years and years and years, 20 plus years ago, I wrote him an email and was asking him so many questions about, well, where did you find this? Where did you find this? That he just sent me his bibliography, which isn't published in the back of the book. And I looked at that as a shopping list. And I started collecting everything that he had in his library. And so all of the police blotters that I have from the 20s, all of these things were because then I would get this mountain, like this huge stack I have next to me of, Berliner Lieben. Here's a little bit. There's 2 boxes here. I just kind of would then see, oh, well, here's the thing he put in the book, and now here's 1,000 more. And it took decades to find it. It's rare material. But the fact that he said something, and I forget what it was. He's like, I don't think I've ever had a fan like you before. And it was a little like borderline stalkery. The way he said it. It's like, I don't think I've ever had a fan like this. But I kept asking questions I think were smart. And then the other thing that happened is that he was giving a presentation he wrote a book about France at this time called Horizontal Collaboration. And he was at Cinefamily in Los Angeles doing a presentation, book signing. And we did an exhibition in the back of a bunch of Weimar era materials, original posters, original pamphlets, and he brought some of his old newspapers and things like that. And I introduced him when he came out, and I forget everything that I said, but first thing he said, he's like, wow, he's like, I've been doing this for a long time and I've never had such a flattering introduction before. And so anyway, that was just kind of a nice moment for me as a fan. And I think what it was is because I've read his book so much, I'm so into it. So yes, anybody that doesn't have Voluptuous Panic, it's the best $20 you will ever spend in learning about this era.
Both of those books that were mentioned are published by Feral House.
Yes.
And you can get it through them. Amazing books.
Yeah.
Yeah,
the last thing I'll say, and this is one of the things I said in the introduction, I used to buy Voluptuous Panic, like by the box, and then give them as gifts, because to me it was one of the greatest books I'd ever read. And anybody that I met that I thought was cool, I wanted them to have this book, like just to be able to experience it.
That might have been the first gift you ever got me.
Yeah, Kat was looking at it last night and laughing, saying, I think this is the first thing you ever got me. I was like, yeah, Voluptuous Panic. That probably...
Little fetus cat was learning a lot.
Great book.
Yeah, definitely. Let's check out another artwork. Do you have another one for us?
While I'm pulling this up, I'll also say, Sean, you just mentioned that we're coming up on the anniversary of Nosferatu, and we're trying to do some things with Shadow of the Vampire around that. For that reason, like trying to get this 4K release out into the world. Here you go. It's making me do a lot. There we go.
Let me get it here. There we go. Wow.
And not to disparage the artist, but Vogt. Can't find anything on him. I'm a good researcher. I've got a lot of books on Germany at this time. A lot of periodicals, a lot of things, and so many of these artists there's not information about. So we know their work. Like I can see Plantekow and I'm like, oh, that's Plantekow or Seher or something. Oh, I recognize the work. But in terms of interesting biographical tidbits, it's very sparse.
It is very sparse, and it's sad because, this is awesome art. And these are artists who were like really in the trenches.
Well, I mean, if they were in the trenches, they probably were doing expressionism.
That's
I was playing off that one. You mean in the trenches working, but yes.
I just meant like in the soup of that era.
Yeah, that's the thing is their work is ubiquitous with like, when you look at someone like Joseph Fenneker is a great example. He was all over the place, as was his quality, because you could see that he was doing super fast sketches to get into this magazine and super fast to get in here. And then he spent a little more time here. And then, of course, the silent film posters that he did were exquisite. Some of the best artworks of the era. I would absolutely put them right next to an Otto Dix painting as being the pinnacle of what these separate disciplines were.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, he did all of the posters for the Marmor House Theater, where a lot of the silent films were shown. He was the lead artist, and I just remember recently we were looking at one of these magazines, and you went, I guess they really were paying him by the drawing for these, because we're used to seeing these. Yeah. If you're familiar with Fenniker, these like very saturated, incredible artworks. But
I think I forgot what I was going to say.
I blew you away with my.
It was the Joseph Fenneker thing that I was thinking about, but it's not. Particularly. Kevin just mentioned the 7 Addictions and 5 Professions of Anita Berber, which is another Mel Gordon book and also fantastic. And it's funny because I remember Adam, the publisher, who unfortunately has also passed away. I remember telling him how much I loved that book. He said, really? I felt like he kind of did a light job on that. And I was laughing, thinking that it's such a heavy book. And there's so much in there that once you've created Voluptuous Panic, which was literally like, the Lord of the Rings trilogy in terms of like the depth and breadth of it, that anything that for anyone else would be a home run compared to Mel Gibson's earlier work was like, yeah, he didn't do as much. He only spent 5 years writing that book. But yes, the Anita Berber book is another great one. There's also there's more. There's a few Anita Berber books. There's that one with her and Sebastian Drost, but that's a whole other.
Well, we certainly have people here who are familiar with Anita Berber and probably Sebastian Drost. But for those who are not familiar, can you give us just? You can't really do the Cliff Notes of Anita Berber, so
I mean, she was the Sarah Bernhardt of Berlin. Sarah Bernhardt epitomized what France was, what Paris was in 1900. And by the same token, it's kind of like, it's like you reap what you sow. And Anita Berber was a very tormented and very complicated human being. And she became, I guess in the way you have like James Dean or Marilyn Monroe becoming an icon of an era, she became the personification of everything that was extraordinary and horrific about Germany in that period. So it's worth reading the books for no other reason, just, that what I said maybe it sounded interesting, but without getting too far into it, that's really who she was. And Sebastian Drost was her lover, and they did was it Dances of Virtue, Dances of Vice, or just Dances of Vice? They did these dances, and they did, if I go too far into it, I think Chandra's going to start throwing shoes at me from the other room, but it gets pretty dark. In a good way, I think, artistically and creatively, but certainly not. How much can I say, Chandra? She said she has her shoe ready, but it's all right. Can I go?
Just do it. Just do it.
Okay, so Allron, the silent film, the Brigitte Helm silent film, and was based on a story by H.H. Ewers, who was kind of like the Lovecraft of Germany. Well, it's the original bad seed. It's the idea that they took semen from a hanged man. The idea was that when you were hung, that you would release all your bodily fluids, and part of that would be ejaculate, and that witches would plant mandrake roots at the bottom of a gallows, and then the semen would fertilize the mandrake, and it would make then this living creature. And so Allron was the idea of a scientist taking the semen of a hanged man and inseminating a mandrake root and creating a girl. And it was like the bad seed. And his idea was, if I nurture her, will she become evil or will she be good if that's what I give to her? In that particular story, she is a good person and then finds out how she was created and then just goes the other direction and basically says, if this is what I am, I'll embrace it. And then just leaves a wreckage of men in her wake. And so the film was obviously famous, the book even more so. And so they did an entire dance called Allron, where they built a huge nest of branches, and he was up on a gallows, and she was laying naked in the nest with her hips thrust upward while he pretended to die by hanging.
Anyone who says Paris is the city of love would be wrong.
So, but that's what I mean about that's Berlin. That was what the real cutting edge stuff was in Berlin. And so she's the quintessential example of that. But to bring it back to this book, that kind of illustrates the point where you can imagine that the general public might love reading about that in the paper, but they might not want to go see that kind of performance every weekend. And so that's where, to me, these illustrations illustrate really where I think most of the population was. If you were, varying degrees of well off, if you were educated, if you just liked funny gag jokes, any of that, there was a huge, huge market for that. And that's really where the bread and butter of entertainment was in Germany at that time. You could be in a province, or you could be in Munich or wherever, and you would still probably read, Bachelor Life. And, it is weird to think about with what was happening with the financial stuff. So that comes back to that line between escapism and really wanting a future. It's kind of like when people now look at ads. I think about when I was a kid and you'd see an ad and it's like, here's the sports car, here's the expensive watch. And of course, none of that registered to me because I was looking at comic books and, and toys, but the idea of a luxurious lifestyle, that's exactly what everybody does today.
Yeah, definitely. Let's get another artwork up on here.
let's get another artwork up on the grill. All right, let's see here. This is I'll put this one up because this is a really good example. So this is Joseph Fenniker, who created those beautiful, beautiful silent film posters. This is an example of creating something that is very much his work, very much his work, but doesn't have, you know, floating corpses or whatever, you know, The Somnambulist or whatever silent film might have been premiering.
Mm-hmm.
One thing about Fenneker's work to me that's kind of funny is that he could be doing a romance story, and because it's so black and white contrasty in that film era, everything he does looks so dark. And it's funny just to think of, you know, his style of artwork being like the new comedy from so-and-so, because it all has, it's just all so heavy. And this is kind of a good example. It's still pretty heavy. You know, you look at the slight distortions, the, you know, some of the exaggeration. If you look at her face, I don't know if this will let me. Oh, well, okay. Let's see. You know, like, I mean, she's tough. You know what I mean? Like,
He's
in
very, I mean,
1923, and in that in a positive
Fenneker
way. I
was the
don't mean
OG
hard.
rock.
Yeah, I don't mean in a hardened way. I just mean, you know, like, it's a woman that, you know, if she's got that haircut in 1923, you know. And so
She's a woman who knows what she's doing.
right now she's in Paris, clearly. But, you know, I love the sketchiness of the line. This is one of the reasons I like the illustration in this era. Is I feel like one of the things that they mastered is look at her stockings and look at the way the hem works. If you look at it up close, like, you really can't tell what this is if you hadn't seen it blown up or you know, panned out, zoomed out. You know, like, there's such a looseness to it that's, you know, when I think, is it Hirschfeld, the American artist from the 50s? You know, this was very advanced in the realm of illustration, is I guess what I'll just say. But I love that. I love his work.
You were mentioning how he made the film posters look dark no matter what genre they were. I mean, at this time, am I wrong that a lot of the film did have strong tones of death and, you know, very gothic themes?
Not, I mean, I think that, you know, you've just revealed what you're attracted to, because that's, you know, they definitely had comedies. They definitely had other things. It's just that I think that what winds up carrying forward in the public consciousness are the things like Cabinet of Dr. Caligari and, you know, the things that have, you know, creepiness and murderous intent, you know, Death in Florence and stuff like that. But here's a great example. You have the poster for Haunted Castle. Looking at that poster, you would think that it was some kind of horror film. It's not. The only scary part in there is a dream sequence. The whole movie is just like a Hitchcock mystery. You know what I mean? So it's just, I think it's kind of just, you know, it's marketing and
Right.
But yeah, he, like, you know, it would be a romantic drama and he would make it look very goth. But I do think part of that is because everything was so contrasty in that time. He really was just kind of keeping with what the art style. This is a good example. This is another Fenneker. But look at the exaggeration of her face, the looseness of the art. Incredible Art Deco. But years Art Deco, the term comes from an exhibition in Paris in 1925. So the term didn't exist yet, but the elements were there. This is the kind of work that would have then been displayed at that exhibition. Like, not this artwork particularly, but this kind of, you see these curves, and you can tell, look she's got the couch with the tassel. That's very Art Deco.
Yeah, very opulent.
Yeah. Well, opulent in a modernist way that we would call Art Deco today, because Byzantine is opulent.
Yeah.
But this would be, look at the way he chose to illustrate the curtains. Those billows, to me, extreme Art Deco. There's no artist in 1900 that would have ever done anything like that.
Well, we got a question if this was a watercolor. This was printed on newsprint, basically.
It was. This probably, in looking at it, I think that the way they were able to do photomechanical reproduction. I've been listening to too many Europeans talk recently. Reproduction. So this original artwork would have been a watercolor. And then it's printed on cheap newsprint. So if I go way in, you'll start to see it fall apart in terms of the dots. But when you look at posters from the turn of the century, they were designed to be lithographs. This kind of magazine illustration would have been very quick. They wouldn't have done the work to do lithography. Like, they were busting out these illustrations, photographing them, printing them. Not only were they inexpensive periodicals, but you also have to remember, it took you a wheelbarrow full of money to get a loaf of bread.
Yeah.
They were not doing fine printing at this time, which, I guess I can't even really say that, because the Germans were so far ahead of everybody else in printing. I suspect that if you looked at American magazines from 1923 and you looked at the magazines in Germany from the era, probably the German ones are a little nicer. But in the case of these, a lot of these periodicals were the equivalent of, like, the Village Voice or Chicago Reader or something. Like, they're print. This was like a local periodical kind of thing. They were weekly. Think about a weekly versus a monthly periodical. So you got to look at the printing of these through that understanding. They were weekly periodicals, so they were done with a different intention than a book or something else.
I just want to share that my dad is here right now, and his comment to the Anita Berber and Sebastian Drost all-around dance was wild. Thanks, Dad. And Sean said the haunted castle is basically Knives Out for 1921. Fenneker's poster made it look like a diabolical occult thriller as opposed to an Agatha Christie type manor mystery.
Yeah, I would have been extremely disappointed if I had gone to the theater.
Yes, it's like those 1950s, 60s exploitation posters.
Yeah. We joke all the time about, you've got all these 50s and 60s. My buddy Shawnee in Ireland sent me a thing saying, "Oh, I love this poster for High School Caesar. I'm going to watch it." I was like, I don't know if you should do that. And it's too late. He'd already seen it. He's like,
let's not go that far.
We have a poster up for Devil Bat's Daughter. It's a great poster. And then I got it on 16 millimeter and we watched it as a family, and it's just absurd. Not even in a good way. And it would have been horrible if it wasn't for the fact that we were all just laughing so hysterically at some of the weird effects and stuff. And so the thing about the silent film art at the time is, I do think you have to remember that film was still so novel that people really were thrilled to get to see anything. We're very spoiled right now. But, to respond to Sean's comment, yeah, I think if they had promoted it as a mystery, I would have gone into it thinking that. and enjoyed it. But the artwork, I mean, look at Fenneker's style. He's got this woman, you know, his women are always so, there's just such a sensuality to them. You know, they always feel like a little less proper in some way. I don't know. Like these aren't great examples, and I don't want to get far off on a tangent away from artwork that we have here to show, but
I am
anyway,
trying so hard not to get off on a tangent.
Because he's great. This is one of the artists I really like, that I'm disappointed that I just can't find great information on. And, you know, he's just, I mean, we can keep his art alive. That's the best we can do. But in terms of that really classic illustration, when you think of the, you know, I mean, aesthetically, I understand it's completely different than Leyendecker or Gibson or anything like that. But, you know, it's just such a great, solid piece of artwork. You know, like it's loose where it needs to be loose. It's tight where it needs to be tight. The composition is outstanding. Yeah. And if you were flipping through a magazine, like an artwork like this elevates it. It really does. And
it does. Yeah. And this doesn't look French at all. This looks German.
That's a big, I think another big thing about me wanting to do this book is that I remember when I first got interested in Art Nouveau, I saw someone's business card, someone long since gone, but it said Art Nouveau, Jugendstil, Vienna Secession, Steel Liberty. Like it listed every different kind of Art Nouveau. And I was like, why don't you just say Art Nouveau? Well, now that I'm older, I understand, like, if you're interested in Jugendstil, in German Art Nouveau, like, that's a thing. And you might not like the Italian or the French. It's kind of like saying, I love rock and roll. Put another dime in the jukebox. But, you know, saying I love rock and roll, and someone's like, oh, well, let's go see, you know, it's like Huey Lewis opening for Slayer or something. Like, there's a huge gamut of what people think of when they think of rock and roll. And Art Nouveau has that same thing. And so when you're looking at illustrations, if you planted a flag on your timeline of 1923 and you looked at what was happening in the Netherlands or Italy or France or America or Germany, I could tell the difference. I could tell which countries were which. And I think that that's something that I wish more people had that sensitivity, but I guess it's like being, if you're a chef, you wish that people could tell the difference between different kinds of apples or something. And most people are just like, you know, all apples taste the same to me. But that is a really special thing to me about Germany at this time, is that you had this incredible talent. You had all of these elements that lean into a futuristic way of looking at art compared to what was existing before the war. And I mean that in terms of utilizing things that we would see in oil paintings, where it's looser in the background and tighter in the front. Like, all of that's really important. And there's just a sensibility to the aesthetics that is very German.
Definitely.
Chandra's
that actually made a good point. One might trace this look to the New Yorker through to the 60s.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, one thing that I have found, I feel like we might have said this on other things before, or maybe my world is all blurring together, but it is rare to me that you meet a good illustrator and that they don't know as much about this as is humanly possible. And what I mean is that if you have like a New Yorker illustrator from the 1960s, I would virtually guarantee if you went to their apartment, they would have stacks of, you know, Berliner Lieben on their mantle. it's just it just is the case. Like I remember, I think I've told some of this before, but like I remember, I'm thinking of so many anecdotes and I'm just trying to pick a good one. Being at Comic-Con and guys like Charles Vess asking about the most obscure Art Nouveau artists that to this day, people still haven't asked about. And me saying, yeah, we do have something like that. I remember.
I think Loeffler was the one he asked you about, wasn't it?
Loeffler.
Sorry, that's a different artist. Loeffler's a different artist.
Yeah. I remember being at Grant Morrison's house when he was there with Gerard Way, and they were designing a Batman story, and they had all of this Italian futurism pulled up. Mm-hmm. And they were talking about Boccioni and all these things. And the way that they were using the language was the way that we would talk about, can we have asparagus for dinner or something? Like and so my experience has been that the people that you look at and you think, wow, these are really extraordinary, creative people. I mean, Dave McKean is another great example. You can talk about illustration across the 20th century, left and down, up and right, and cinema and things like that. So I would encourage anyone who is a creative person to be digging back as far as you can. At the very least, you'll be able to have an interesting conversation the next time you run into an artist you love.
Mm-hmm. It's a very good point. And they'll be excited to have that conversation.
But I'm sure that anyone that was working as a professional illustrator for a magazine in the 60s, it would be like now you having a magazine from the 80s. Do you know what I mean? Like it's only 40 years earlier.
It's crazy.
So it's completely reasonable. Something a lot of these guys used to do, at least just speaking to comics, because that's more what I know, is back in the 70s and 80s, they were mimeographing things. That's how so many of them had kind of the same Mucha reference material and things like that. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, if an artist from the New Yorker didn't know about these periodicals, I would be shocked. But
friends,
it's 7:03.
An hour.
Yeah, thank you guys so much for being here. This was fun. No, please go.
I do want to make an announcement. You guys are the first to know. We have officially launched the Kickstarter for the next Berlin Girls book. This is going to cover artworks from 1925. So still very much in the Weimar era. And you can pre-order it on Kickstarter. The link is in the description below, so you can go right there. And if you love the artworks from here, then you'll certainly love the artworks from Berlin Girls 1925.
It's a cool one. There's so much great artwork from the era. It's kind of hard to pick the pieces to pull together, but there was definitely enough for a book. When we originally did Berlin Girls 1923, it was going to be just everything. And then as we were narrowing it down, it's like there's enough just from 1 year to make 5 books. Let's pick this group that works together. Let's do that. And then we pulled aside the next group, the number 2 group, and that was the 1925 group. And it's not, if we wind up doing other years, it's not that we're kind of doing them in order of how good they are, as much as it's literally just as we go through the magazines and Kat's pulling things and scanning them. And, there's great stuff from 1921. There's great stuff from other years. But so every now and then we want to do another year book. And this one it's been a couple years, but so it's time for another one. Do you have anything else you want to say about Berlin Girls? There's also no real text in this. I should say there's a 1-page introduction that I did, but with most of the books that we do, like obviously Le Pater is a ton of text and then a lot just have little bits through. With this one, I felt like it was better, like the drawing that we just had up. We'll do this and then we can you pull that image up again?
Oh, yes, that's on my end. Sorry.
Like Forrest said, the composition here draws the viewer into the kiss. Thank you, Forrest. I didn't want to put any dialogue in the book because I thought I don't know anything about the artist that's meaningful. And I think that for each of us as a viewer to get into it, like the one that we had earlier up with the girl getting the love letter and the flowers. And I said, well, what's she thinking? And you said, oh God, another one. Like I kind of wanted people to be able to experience these the way that they would have in 1923, which was out of context, just beautiful images. And so I just wrote a one-page thing that kind of just gives the overview of what they are, where they're from. And it'll be the same thing here. I just wrote a one-page thing. And so the rest of it is just packed full of illustrations. So it's a little different if you've got other books of ours. Definitely don't expect that there's a lot of data, but what's lacking in data is there's more of in terms of artworks.
And just to show you guys again, this is I'll get this right one day, but this is the standard hardcover edition. And then this is the slipcase edition that's numbered. The 1925 Berlin Girls will have the 2 editions as well.
And there's like a vellum plate inside the slipcase edition. There's no additional content. We kind of did it just because we had done it on an earlier book where we allowed people afterwards, hey, if you'd like us to make a custom slipcase, we'll put an order in and do it. And whatever quantity of people did, 100 people or something, when they showed up, it looked really cool. So the reason that we did it then now for these books is just because instead of making it kind of an add-on at the end, people can just come in at the front end. And they're more expensive, but it's because we're doing smaller quantities. But the craftsmanship of the bindery is outstanding. And I'm really proud of the way the books turned out, not just from what we've done, but what the printers and binders are able to do. It's really good work. It's the same printer that did the Le Pater book. So it is that level of quality.
Absolutely. And again, the link to back that to pre-order on Kickstarter is below in the description. Chandra, if it's possible, we might be able to post it also in the chat. If not, you can find it under the video in the description box.
And it's on all our social media.
Yes, definitely.
And, it's the cliche to ask, but definitely if there's people that would like this kind of thing, please email it to them. The nature of being an independent publisher is that you get to do really, really cool things, and there's smaller print runs. But we found that the single thing that moves the needle for us and helps us do cooler and cooler things is the word of mouth. The people that are doing the YouTube reviews, if you look for Le Pater, there's a couple that are outstanding. Those things really make a difference in terms of what happens with our numbers. So sharing on social media is great, but if you know someone that loves books, just sending them an email and saying, yeah, you really need to get this and get into these people's ecosystem, it does help a lot.
Absolutely. Yes, it does. We're very much a community-based publisher. One more thing, and then I'll let you go, I promise. Next month is going to be Beautiful Macabre. So we're going to do, kind of a 90-degree turn from the kind of subject matter we're covering today. But these are rare and peculiar posters. I mean, it speaks for itself. You've got a lot of...
I bought a lot of weird things over the years.
Thank you. Yes. And if you like the Infernal Creatures book, if you have it, or if you've just seen the Salon, you will really dig this book too. It ranges from utterly horrifying to funny and dark, but it's just really cool to look through. And you can get your copy of that at centuryguild.net, and we'll see you back here in a month.
Hold on. Someone said, what's one of the weirdest, like an example of the difference between this and Infernal Creatures, we leaned heavy into like devil and witch. And with this one, like there's posters that I would see where I put the Elimin poster up. That's the one.
Oh, okay. That was the syphilis snake.
I saw this poster and it's I'm just gonna I was like, I think everyone has the hello. Everyone's got the their names. I don't know what it is. So this Elimin poster is a little kid surrounded by roaches. And they're coming and they're climbing into his oatmeal. And so it's just a roach poison poster. And I was like, this kid is screaming and crying. What a weird thing. And then the one next to it was for an antiseptic. And so it's got, this beautiful woman, and then death is recoiling. And so it's just a lot of stuff like that. Like it's more product based. Mm-hmm. But the products are advertised in strange ways.
Let's just do the next salon now. Let's just do it. Thank you guys. I keep wanting to say I love you guys. I do.
Yeah, if you haven't been here before, we were used to being in the gallery, and then at the end of an opening or whatever, you'd be hanging out and talking about poster that was on the walls or pulling things out of drawers. And with everyone being so distant right now, we miss that and wanted to kind of find a way to recreate it. So we thought talking about the books was a great way to start that, and really, really appreciate the questions, just because we can ramble about anything. And instead of this just being like a lecture, we're trying to make it just, especially for people that have the books and love it, like, oh, is there anything that we could expand on? And eventually we'll be doing like a Le Pater, probably more than one of these salons. And that'll be a perfect example of, I cut that book down from 400 pages to 200. So there's tons of stories to tell. So yeah. And someone asked, Atticus Ace asked, will there be more books in the series? If you mean the Berlin Girls, yes, I think we will, just because we love the era so much. There's so much great things there. It's just a matter of working it in when we can. We're really trying to get the Ilse book out this year. There's a couple other really great things. There's that's a funny comment. COVID threw everything off. We were going to do Berlin Girls. I looked at the date of the introduction. I just changed it to be February 2022, but the date that I had on it, I think, was like January 2020. So a lot of things just got thrown off. So but hopefully we can do one of these a year or something like that. I don't know. I'm looking at you, Kat, but ultimately Chandra is in charge of publishing. So I'll just put them together. But they're cool. If they sell, then we'll do more. And
well, the thing we can say is, if it's not that, it'll be something else that's really engaging and magical and cool and artistic. And
yeah, there you go.
That's all she wrote.
That's all she wrote.
Thank you, everybody, so much for being here and for discussing these artworks with us. And yeah.
And I'll play piano on the outro instead of the guitars. There we
go. I've got that coming up right now. Yep. All right. Bye, everybody.
Thank you, guys. I'm super excited to see you next time. And that's going to be a really, really fun, a really fun conversation.
Yes, it'll be great. See you then.